before you throw away that weird piece of cardboard from the case of wine that you got at Trader Joe's, or that crumpled up receipt from your purse, or that way too nice bag that your new set of bedding came packaged in, hear me out. If you're starting out in mixed media art, this stuff, this junk, this stuff is gold, like actual treasure. You don't need to spend a lot of money or fill a shopping cart full of art supplies to begin as a mixed media artist. You just need to start noticing the stuff around you differently. Hi, I'm Wendy from Willow Wanders, and this is my Mixed Media 101 series. It's a beginner-friendly series where I break down how to get started with mixed media art. And the reason I'm doing this series is because I, too, was someone who once would look at mixed media art and I didn't even know where to begin. I kind of want to give another disclaimer that I give, hopefully with every one of these videos. And that disclaimer is that if you've already got a mixed media art practice, the videos that I'm making really are not targeted to speak to you. These videos are truly for people who've never made mixed media art before and they don't even know where to begin. So this video is going to be a great video if you are really just getting started out. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the kinds of things that we as mixed media artists notice and then collect so that we have a really interesting stash of stuff that we can make our mixed media art with. So you officially have permission to start hoarding interesting garbage. At this point, you might want to know why somebody would collect junk in the first place and why you don't just go out to, let's say, a Michael's or a Hobby Lobby or Walmart or some other big box store and just buy a bunch of cute paper and some craft paints and call it a day. Like, why would you spend your time going to thrift stores and estate sales and what do you call them? Vintage swap meets and whatever. And why would you start looking at all of the packaging that comes into your house? You know, maybe you get a new pair of shoes or you have a case of wine or anything. Like, why would you be looking at all the packaging that always comes in and thinking, is that something I want to keep or is that something I really can toss out? So the reason why is because the real magic of mixed media art is in layering things that have texture, that have history, and that have personality. So that little receipt that you got at the grocery store, that receipt tells the story. Maybe it doesn't show up exactly as that receipt in your work, but there's the history of it there, and you'll see the little pieces, parts of it in your work. An old book page, that old book page is going to have text on it. It's going to have the pattern from that text. It's going, maybe that old book page is in a language that's not the primary language spoken in your culture. It's going to be interesting. Pieces of discarded wrapping paper provide instant color and pattern with very little effort. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that we toss out has way more character than the stuff that we could ever buy. So instead of spending money on a lot of supplies, we're going to start looking at everyday trash like that trash is a potential art supply. And then you get to decide, do I want to keep it and store it, or do I want to dispose of it? So where would you even begin feathering your mixed media nest? Where would you even begin collecting? You just start with what comes into your life naturally. You don't really have to overthink it. Maybe you bought a new pair of shoes and there was some packaging and you're standing in your kitchen and you're deciding, should I throw this out or should I keep it? Could I do something with this? I don't know. Maybe you can always throw it out later. Paper is everywhere. And one of the things that is very available, whether it's free from a local library because they are discarding their old books, or it's something that you pick up for 50 cents at an estate sale, but old book pages are kind of fundamental to any mixed media art practice. At least in my opinion, they are. But even more than old book pages, junk mail with its envelopes with all the amazing textures in the security envelopes, the patterns in junk mail, the receipts that you get from stores, old dictionary pages, magazine images, wrapping paper, tissue paper from wrappings, postcards that come in the mail, birthday cards that maybe you receive, or holiday cards that you get. So think paper. I'm just talking about the category of all of the paper. And maybe you're going to end up using this paper as is as a layer in your work, but also maybe you're going to end up using these papers to create even more layered effects as you paint them. And then that becomes part of your work. Anything that looks boring by itself could become really cool once you layer paint or ink or mark making or anything over it. The next category of stuff that most mixed media artists collect comes into the fabric and the threads category. So the fiber category. This can be tiny scraps of fabric, like the ones that I've got in these bowls. Now, a lot of this comes from other projects that I've done, and I pretty much almost never throw out a little piece of fabric that comes off of a project because I know that those little pieces of fiber, those little pieces of fabric, those could become perfect things in another project in the future. So pieces of fabric, lace, vintage embroidery, thread, just the threads that come off of everything that we live with and work with, anything like that can add texture to your work. Old clothes. If you're going to donate old clothes, that's wonderful. But if you have some old clothing that maybe you're particularly fond of, maybe it's got a color or a pattern or a texture that you really love. If you really love it, I would say maybe think about not donating that piece, because actually that fabric from the clothing could become a beautiful book cover or pages even in a book. When you get new clothing, the labels are typically pretty awesome. So I have a pretty decent sized collection of labels from clothing that I've bought in the last many years. All right, the next category of things is just kind of like strange and random little bits of garbage and stuff. Not only can these little elements become part of your mixed media art pieces, but all of these little elements can actually become tools that you print with. So in mixed media art, we do a lot of painted papers. That's a big focus, at least in my experience, of mixed media art. And you're going to want to have quite a hardy collection of random tools, objects, junk that you can actually use to make marks on your papers and fabrics as you're creating the materials that you use to build into your mixed media art pieces. Not just texture tools, but texture stuff. Let's just say texture stuff. So before you toss out any packaging that comes your way, just give it a look to see if it could be pressed into paint and then that paint pressed onto paper or fabric, and maybe it would give it some texture. So things like bubble wrap, mesh produce bags, foil wrappers, cardboard with interesting patterns, anything that's got a pattern or a texture in it that could transfer paint onto another surface. That's going to be really good stuff for your mixed media art practice. So, like I said, you could use these things for printing textures. You could use then what you print as collage layers in your pieces, or you might even use these packaging items as straight up things that you glue into your pieces. Or maybe you use these things as things that you upcycle into a mixed media art piece, like a tag or a book, things like that. Using these objects that you have collected to make your marks and also to incorporate into your pieces, these are the things that make your art uniquely yours. That's why these things become mixed media artists' treasure. This is your gold. These things are your odd, weird, rusty, garbagey treasures. Okay, so the final category that I'm going to talk about today is natural things. So these are things that you might pick up when you're out on a walk, an interesting leaf or a dried flower of some sort, a dried pod, a seed pod of some kind. When you're out and about, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to collect things out in nature that if they're dried, they would be really cool to use in some mixed media art projects, or you can even use these things as texture tools. So another thing that is really good for mixed media art that is kind of like in that category of natural things is things that get stained, like a tea bag has stains or a coffee filter has stains. Just make sure that anything that has organic material in it is totally dried before you stash it away or you store it. Because if it has any organic thing that's decomposing, you're going to create essentially a compost pile or you're going to get mold or mildew in there. So you don't want that. But things like a tea bag are really wonderful for incorporating into your mixed media art. Okay, so let's just do a super quick recap of what to start collecting for your mixed media stash without even spending a dime. Paper scraps, fabric bits, tiny found objects, weird packaging, anything with a texture, natural stuff like dried seed pods, really cool leaves. Basically, if it's flat, if it's textured, if it's interesting, just think about whether or not it might be worth saving. At this point, you don't even have to worry about what you're going to do with that thing. Just trust me. When it comes to making mixed media art, you're going to be really happy that you feathered your stash early and often. If you like this series, consider going over to my website, willawanders.com, and signing up for my free course, Mixed Media 101, over at willawanders.com. I've got a lot of other free resources over at willawanders.com, along with all of the other incredible courses that you can take when you're really ready to say, yes, I am going to start making mixed media art.